My name is Jake, and I'm 18 years old. This is a story I've never told anyone before, one that still makes my heart race every time I think about it. It all started when an unexpected event turned my life upside down, and in the process, brought me face to face with something I could have never anticipated. It happened about 6 months ago when our house was flooded. The damage was so bad that my father and I had to move out for a while until repairs were made. We didn't really have anywhere else to go, but luckily, my dad's old friend, Mark, offered to let us stay with him. I didn't really know Mark all that well at the time. He was just someone I'd met a couple of times at family gatherings. What I did know was that he lived in a really nice apartment, way bigger and fancier than our old house. The place had the kind of sleek, modern design you'd see in a magazine, with huge windows, luxurious furniture, and this quiet, peaceful vibe. It was the kind of place that felt like it belonged to someone who had really made it in life. Mark was 35 and he lived alone, as I knew he was openly gay. He immediately responded when my dad reached out to him, welcoming us into his home like it was no big deal. I remember the day we arrived. It was early in the morning, and Mark met us at the door, his face lighting up when he saw us. He was incredibly kind and hospitable, helping us carry our bags inside and giving us a quick tour of the place. Even though the situation wasn't ideal, I couldn't help but feel grateful for how generous he was. Little did I know, though, that this simple act of kindness would lead to something that would change me forever. I had always remembered Mark, my dad's friend, as an incredibly handsome man. Even when I was younger, maybe 14 or 15, I couldn't help but notice how different he was from other adults around me. He was tall, standing at least 6'3", with broad shoulders and a build that made him look like he spent a lot of time in the gym. When we arrived at Mark's apartment, it was early in the morning. My dad and I had driven through the night, and I was tired, but the moment I saw Mark standing at his front door, any exhaustion I felt evaporated. He looked better than ever. If anything, he had only gotten more attractive over the years. He was dressed casually, in a tight black t-shirt that showed off his muscular frame and jeans that hugged his thighs in a way that made it impossible not to stare. His dark hair was still perfect, but now there were a few strands of gray at his temples, which only added to his appeal. Over the next few days, life at Mark's place was surprisingly comfortable. He was incredibly kind, always checking in to make sure we had everything we needed, and he seemed especially attentive to me. I noticed how he'd casually touch me throughout the day, little things like rubbing my shoulder when he passed by or running his fingers through my hair when we sat down to eat. Every touch sent a jolt through me, making my heart race. It was so subtle, but it felt like there was something more behind it, something unspoken. I started to wonder if maybe he was picking up on the way I felt about him. Was I imagining it, or was there something mutual happening between us? One afternoon, while my dad was out running errands, I was sitting on the couch watching TV when Mark came and sat next to me. The space between us was minimal, and I could feel the heat radiating off his body. He didn't say much, just asked how I was settling in, but the way he looked at me made it hard to focus on anything else. His hand rested on the back of the couch, dangerously close to my shoulder, and I found myself leaning just slightly into him, craving that closeness. Each day that passed, my feelings for Mark only grew stronger. I was constantly thinking about him, his body, his voice, the way he moved. I couldn't help but fantasize about what it would be like to be with him, to feel his hands on me in a way that was more than just friendly. One morning, something happened that changed everything. My dad had left for a business trip, and it was just Mark and me alone in the apartment. I woke up early, still half asleep, and decided to head for the shower. The hallway was quiet as I made my way to the bathroom, my mind on autopilot, when suddenly, I opened the door to find Mark already inside. The moment I realized what was happening, my heart stopped. There he was, standing naked in front of the mirror, the steam from the shower still filling the room. His body was glistening with water, droplets running down the contours of his muscular chest and abs. He was everything I had imagined and more. His broad shoulders tapered down to a narrow waist, and his powerful legs looked like they belonged to a professional athlete. I couldn't help but stare, my eyes tracing every line of his body, every curve of muscle. He looked perfect. No, more than perfect. He looked like something out of my wildest fantasies, standing there in the soft glow of the bathroom light. For a split second, I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I took it all in. My pulse was racing, and I felt a rush of heat spread through my body. I knew I shouldn't be looking, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. His presence filled the room, his masculine energy so overwhelming that I could barely think. Suddenly, the reality of the situation hit me, and I panicked. "Oh my God, I'm sorry," I stammered, my voice barely more than a whisper as I quickly backed out of the bathroom, shutting the door behind me. My face burned with embarrassment, my mind racing with a mix of guilt and excitement. I had just seen Mark completely naked, and I couldn't get the image out of my head. Every detail was etched into my memory. The way his muscles flexed as he moved, the way his skin glistened with water, the sheer size and presence of him. It was almost too much to handle. I rushed back to my room, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to process what had just happened. I couldn't believe what I had seen. Mark was more beautiful than I had ever imagined, and the sight of him standing there, so casual, so confident, had me feeling things I couldn't even begin to describe. I felt like I was on fire, my entire body buzzing with the memory of his naked form. But then, as the initial shock began to wear off, something else settled in: desire. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't just embarrassed. I was turned on. I was more turned on than I had ever been in my life. My body responded instantly, and I found myself fantasizing about what it would be like to touch him, to feel his skin under my hands, to taste him. As I sat there, trying to calm myself down, I heard the bathroom door open. My heart jumped into my throat, and I quickly looked up. There was Mark walking out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped loosely around his waist. His hair was still wet, and his skin was flushed from the heat of the shower. He looked at me with a knowing smile, one that sent a shiver down my spine. "Jake, no need to be shy," he said, his voice low and smooth. He took a few steps closer to me, his eyes locked on mine. My heart raced as he came closer, the air between us charged with an intensity that I could barely comprehend. He stood in front of me, his towering frame filling my vision, and I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, my body reacting in ways I couldn't control. Mark reached out, his hand resting on my shoulder, his fingers brushing against my skin. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through me, and I swallowed hard, unable to speak. "I know what you're feeling," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You don't need to be embarrassed. We're both men. We both know what this is." Before I could respond, he leaned in closer, his hands sliding down my chest, and my breath hitched in my throat. My mind was spinning, my body reacting to every little movement he made. He was so close, his towel barely hanging onto his hips, his presence so overwhelming that I felt like I might lose control. And then, without warning, he took my hand and pressed it against his body, guiding me toward his towel. Mark looked down at me, his eyes dark with desire, and I knew what I had to do. Slowly, I sank to my knees, the tension between us reaching a boiling point. His towel fell to the floor, and there he was, completely exposed. I didn't hesitate. I took him into my mouth, and the feeling of him against my lips, the taste of him, was more than I had ever imagined. It was like every fantasy I had ever had was suddenly becoming real, and I was lost in it, completely consumed by the moment. This was everything I had ever wanted, and it was finally happening. As I worked my mouth around him, Mark let out a low, rumbling groan that sent a shiver down my spine. His hand came to rest on the back of my head, his fingers tangling in my hair as he gently guided me, not too forceful, but just enough to let me know he was in control. It was clear that he had done this before, and the thought of being with someone so experienced only turned me on more. I wanted to prove that I could be everything he needed, that I could keep up with him, that I could satisfy him. Then, without warning, Mark turned me around and pushed me up against the wall. The sudden movement took my breath away, and before I could even process what was happening, I felt his hands on me, roaming over my body with a kind of urgency that made my skin tingle. His fingers slipped under the waistband of my shorts, pulling them down in one quick motion, and I gasped as the cool air hit my skin. I was completely exposed, vulnerable, and I loved every second of it. The feeling of his hands on my bare skin, the way his fingers trailed down my spine, it was all too much. I could barely catch my breath, my heart hammering in my chest as I waited for what I knew was coming next. Mark didn't hesitate. He pressed himself up against me from behind, his chest flush against my back, his breath hot on my neck as he leaned in close. "You don't need to be shy," he whispered, his voice low and rough. "I know what you want." I shivered at the sound of his voice, my entire body reacting to his words. He was right. I did want this. I wanted him more than anything I had ever wanted in my life, and the fact that he wanted me to made it all the more intoxicating. The next day, everything felt surreal. It was hard to believe what had happened between Mark and me. The memory of it, the intensity, lingered with me every time I closed my eyes. But as much as I wanted to replay every detail in my mind, I had to keep it together because my father returned home. That meant we had to act like nothing had changed, like everything was normal. The next day felt pretty weird. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened between Mark and me. It was hard to act normal when my dad came back, but I had to keep it cool. Mark, though, acted like nothing had changed. He was as calm as ever, talking to my dad like usual, which made me feel even more nervous. Every time Mark and I made eye contact, it was like I could feel the weight of what we were hiding. I had to look away quickly, so my dad wouldn't notice anything. It was strange, trying to act normal while secretly feeling like everything had changed. My dad had no idea what had gone on, and that made it all the more intense. I knew Mark and I had to keep it quiet, but I couldn't stop thinking about him. I wanted more. And luckily, 2 days after my dad left for another work trip, Mark and I were alone again. That whole day was filled with tension. We kept giving each other these subtle looks, brushing hands accidentally, like we were both waiting for something to happen. I knew it was only a matter of time before one of us made a move. Later that night, I went to my room, knowing Mark would probably come to me. I could just feel it. Sure enough, after a little while, there was a knock on my door. My heart was racing as I called out for him to come in. Mark started taking off my clothes, and I just let it happen. My body was buzzing with excitement. He stripped down too, and it was impossible not to stare at how amazing he looked. When he got on the bed with me, his hands were everywhere, touching me in ways that made me lose control. Things escalated quickly, and before I knew it, Mark had flipped me onto my stomach. He was behind me, and I could feel him pressed against me. I wanted him so bad, and he knew it. He was gentle at first, but as he eased into me, it felt like nothing I'd ever experienced before. I gripped the sheets, trying to hold on as the pleasure just kept building. We kept going until we both couldn't hold back anymore. When we finally finished, I was completely spent. Mark collapsed next to me, and for a while, we just laid there, catching our breath. It was like we didn't need to say anything. We both knew this was something special, even if we couldn't talk about it. A couple of weeks passed in a blur. My dad kept working, coming and going like usual, and during the times he was away, Mark and I continued to sneak around, making the most of the moments we had alone. Every time we were together, it felt more intense, more exciting. I was completely hooked on him, and honestly, I didn't want it to stop. But I knew it couldn't last forever. One day, my dad told me that it was time for us to move out. He said we'd been staying with Mark long enough, and he didn't want to keep imposing on him. I knew he was right. We'd been living there for weeks, and it was only supposed to be temporary. But hearing that still hit me hard. I didn't want to leave. The thought of not seeing Mark every day, not having those secret moments with him, made me feel like I was losing something special. But there was nothing I could do. I couldn't exactly tell my dad the real reason I didn't want to leave. So we packed up and moved to a rental house in another city while ours was being renovated. It was a nice place, but it wasn't the same. Every night, I'd lie in bed thinking about Mark, missing him. I kept replaying everything we'd done together in my head, wishing I could go back and relive it. I tried to focus on other things, but my mind kept drifting back to him. I couldn't help but dream about the day we'd finally return to our home, just so I'd have an excuse to see Mark again. I didn't know when that would be, but I hoped it would be soon. I didn't want our story to end here. It was the best gay sex in my life.